Welcome to Shatter.
The ring hit the hardwood and kept spinning long after she'd already turned toward the door. It wasn't dramatic. No yelling. No slammed drawers. Just one clean motion of her hand, the dull clink, and the sound of her heels moving away from me like a decision already made. She didn't say she was leaving for good. She didn't have to. She picked up her coat, glanced at her phone, and walked out for the night as if the apartment was a hotel room she'd outgrown. The door closed softly behind her. That was the loudest part. I stood where I was, barefoot, staring at the ring on the floor. It had stopped spinning. It always does. Her phone buzzed once on the kitchen counter. She'd left it behind. That was new. I didn't touch it. I didn't follow her. I didn't text. I picked up the ring, set it on the counter next to her phone, and went to the bedroom. The closet was still shared, but only one side looked used. Dresses arranged by color. Blazers spaced like they were waiting to be photographed. Everything pressed, curated, ready to be seen. She worked in retail branding. Everything about her job was surface and timing. Campaigns, launches, presentations. Smiles in conference rooms that smelled like citrus wipes and ambition. Lately, those smiles had started showing up at home, practiced and misplaced. I took a duffel bag from the top shelf and set it on the bed. Not to pack, just to have it there. Her laptop sat closed on the desk, charger neatly wrapped. Company issued. I knew the model. I'd reviewed the security policy when she first brought it home. I'd asked her not to connect it to our network. She'd laughed and said I worried too much. The phone buzzed again on the counter. I walked back into the kitchen. The screen lit up with a name I'd seen before in passing, usually followed by her lowering the brightness or angling the screen away. Mark Reynolds, commercial director. The kind of title that came with access and quiet authority. The message preview cut off after a few words, but it didn't need to finish the sentence. I turned the phone face down and slid it next to the ring. Outside, a car door closed. Tires pulled away. She'd thrown the ring like a test. A threat meant to pull me back into line. I didn't argue with tests. I treated them as final. The apartment stayed quiet after she left, but it wasn't empty. Silence like that carries weight. It waits. I didn't clean up. I didn't pace. I took the ring and her phone and placed them side by side on the counter like evidence already logged. Then I opened my laptop. Work muscle memory took over without asking how I felt about it. By morning, my inbox had filled itself the way it always did. Alerts, system reports, routine noise. And one message that didn't belong. It came from Ethan, a colleague I trusted because he never asked questions that weren't necessary. He handled risk audits for third-party vendors. He knew how to look without touching. He didn't mention my wife. He didn't mention names. He forwarded a calendar invite screenshot with a single line typed above it. Something I should probably flag to you. Didn't feel random. The invite showed a private dinner marked as strategic alignment. Location offsite. Attendees limited. One external brand lead. One internal executive. The executive was Mark Reynolds. I didn't respond right away. I enlarged the image and read the metadata like it might blink first. The brand lead name wasn't visible, but the domain was. Her company's domain. The timing matched a stretch of evenings when she'd started coming home later, smelling like unfamiliar cologne layered over her usual perfume. She'd blamed rebranding pressure, end-of-quarter stress, leadership visibility. Words that sounded impressive enough to shut down suspicion. I closed the message and stared at my desktop background. A neutral pattern I'd chosen because it didn't invite interpretation. Ethan sent another message a few minutes later. No explanation. Just a link. It was public-facing, buried deep enough that it didn't look intentional. A press release draft uploaded too early, cached by a third-party service. Upcoming leadership reshuffle. Marketing expansion. A new director role created for brand continuity across verticals. The language was vague. The promotion path wasn't. I didn't need to scroll far to see Mark Reynolds quoted twice. Vision. Confidence. Talent recognition. Her name wasn't there. Not yet. That was the point. I closed the browser and leaned back. The apartment still smelled like her shampoo and citrus cleaner. Her coffee mug sat in the sink where she'd left it the night before. Lipstick mark on the rim. A detail I'd once found endearing. My phone buzzed. A missed call from her. No voicemail. Then another call. Then a message asking where I was. I didn't open it. I wasn't angry. That would have been simpler. Anger makes noise. Noise attracts attention. What I felt was alignment. Pieces that had been out of place finally clicked into a system that made sense. She hadn't walked out to cool off. She'd stepped into something she believed was already secured, and she'd assumed I'd still be here when she got back. By the time the sun came up, I had already stopped thinking of the apartment as ours. Her messages kept stacking without me opening them. The notifications were enough. Concern shifted to irritation faster than she probably expected. Control hates uncertainty, especially when it's public. I logged into the joint accounts first, not because of panic, but because shared systems are liabilities. The balances were healthy, too healthy for someone who'd recently complained about cash flow. I pulled transaction histories and filtered by categories she rarely touched. Travel, dining, executive lounges she had no reason to access. Patterns surfaced fast. Repeating locations. Familiar gaps. Charges timed perfectly between her late meetings and mornings she claimed she'd stayed with a coworker. None of it looked reckless. It looked planned. I exported everything and stored it where it wouldn't be accidentally found. Her cloud storage was still synced to the home network. She'd never changed the password after I'd set it up years ago. I didn't browse. I searched. File names told enough of the story on their own. Presentation decks with revision histories that showed someone else's edits after midnight. Photos saved and deleted within minutes. A folder labeled temporary that hadn't been temporary at all. I closed it before curiosity turned into noise. My phone lit up again, this time with a voicemail notification. I didn't play it. I archived it without listening, the same way I handled phishing attempts at work. Not hostile, just removed from the environment. Around mid-morning, a delivery notification came through. A package addressed to her. High-end garment brand. Overnight shipping. The kind of thing sent to make an impression when timing matters. I redirected it. At work, nothing changed. Systems stayed green. Threat levels normal. I joined meetings, spoke when required, kept my camera off. Nobody noticed anything different because nothing different had happened yet. That was the advantage. By afternoon, she tried a different approach. A longer message this time. Less sharp. Framed as concern. She said she'd overreacted. Said the ring thing had been dramatic. Said we needed to talk like adults. I didn't respond. Instead, I revoked her access to the shared calendar. Not maliciously, just cleanly. Meetings disappeared from her view. So did reminders. So did the location sharing she'd insisted on after one of her coworkers got followed home. I changed the password on the streaming services, not out of spite, but because shared accounts imply shared presence. That was no longer accurate. By evening, her tone shifted again. Shorter messages. Typos creeping in. The kind that happen when someone's attention is split between explaining and watching something else fall apart. I didn't block her. Silence is more effective when it's deliberate. I wasn't building a case. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was reducing exposure. She'd thrown the ring to test whether I'd chase. What she didn't understand was that I specialize in systems that shut down quietly when a breach is confirmed. And once they're offline, they don't come back up just because someone misses the access. By the next morning, the apartment no longer reflected her routines. Her side of the bathroom still looked untouched, but the digital layer underneath our life had already shifted. Grocery deliveries rerouted. Ride history wiped from the shared account. The smart lock codes updated quietly, the kind of update that doesn't send alerts unless someone tries to use the old one. She did. The notification came through while I was making coffee. Failed entry attempt. Then another. Then nothing. Her messages escalated. Confusion replaced irritation. She said her key wasn't working. Said the app must be glitching. Asked if I was home. I left it unanswered. Instead, I forwarded my mail to a new address and paused all shared subscriptions. Not canceled. Paused. A temporary state that still feels reversible if you don't understand how systems behave after disruption. I packed only what I needed. Clothes without sentiment. Documents I'd already digitized. Hardware I owned personally. The duffel bag I'd set out the night before finally served its purpose. I didn't leave a note. At work, I took a conference room and made 2 calls that didn't require explanation. One to HR. One to building management. Both conversations stayed professional. Relocation for a project. Temporary change. No drama. By the time she stopped calling and started texting again, I was already somewhere she couldn't track. Her messages grew longer. She asked if I was punishing her. Said disappearing like this was cruel. Said adults didn't shut down communication. She still thought this was emotional. She didn't understand that I wasn't reacting to her behavior. I was responding to the structure underneath it. Status-driven decisions always leave footprints. They require alignment from multiple systems. Money, access, time, silence from the right people. Around midday, Ethan sent another message. Short again. He said the dinner invite had been removed from the calendar. Quietly, like it had never existed. He added that Mark Reynolds had canceled 2 internal meetings without explanation. I didn't reply. By evening, her social media activity spiked. Stories posted and deleted. Photos from places she rarely tagged before. A restaurant known for privacy and expensive wine. The kind of place where deals feel personal. The last message she sent that night didn't accuse. It asked if I was safe. I archived it without opening. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd vanished. No posts. No replies. No visible reaction. But disappearance isn't absence when it's intentional. It's repositioning. She'd walked out expecting the night to end with leverage. Instead, she'd triggered a full disengagement she couldn't reverse by coming back. And the part she couldn't see yet was that the silence wasn't meant for her. It was meant for everyone else watching closely enough to notice she'd lost access before she lost her composure. The shift happened quietly, the way real leverage always does. By the next day, her messages stopped trying to reach me and started circling outward. Mutual contacts. Casual check-ins framed as concern. People who'd never asked about our marriage suddenly wanted to know if everything was okay. I didn't answer them either. Silence scales when you let it. At work, I stayed invisible. That was easy. My job rewards absence as long as systems don't fail. And nothing failed. If anything, my dashboards looked cleaner than usual. Fewer anomalies. Fewer loose ends. Around midday, Ethan sent one last update. He said procurement had frozen a discretionary budget tied to Mark Reynolds' division. Temporary review. Routine language. But reviews at that level don't happen without someone asking the right question at the wrong time. I didn't ask. What I did do was audit my own exposure. Our shared credit profile had already been separated. My direct deposit rerouted. Her brand perks still active, but no longer anchored to my identifiers. If she wanted to keep the lifestyle, she'd need to explain why the infrastructure behind it had gone silent. That kind of explanation travels. Her social presence changed tone. Less polish. More reassurance. Photos that tried to look spontaneous, but were framed too carefully. Captions about gratitude and growth that didn't quite land. People like her boss don't invest in instability. They invest in narratives that elevate them. By evening, she posted nothing at all. That was new. A private message came through from someone I barely knew. A woman from her department. The wording was cautious. She said there were rumors. She said leadership didn't like distractions during expansion. She said my wife seemed distracted. I archived it. Later, another notification appeared. A tagged photo she'd been removed from. A corporate event. Clean lighting. Familiar faces. Mark Reynolds front and center. My wife nowhere in frame. I didn't feel satisfaction. That would have implied intention. I hadn't moved against him. I'd simply removed myself from a structure that had been propping something up quietly. Control hates asymmetry. When one piece stops responding, pressure shifts elsewhere. That night, she tried calling again. Once. Then twice. Then she stopped. No voicemail this time. The game she thought she was playing required an audience and a stable opponent. Someone predictable enough to absorb the imbalance while she climbed. What she hadn't accounted for was the moment the system stopped acknowledging her moves. Not with anger. Not with demands. Just with a clean absence that forced everyone else to recalculate where she stood without me in the picture. And recalculation is where status arrangements start to crack. The first public crack didn't come from me. It never does. It showed up in places she couldn't control. Conversations she wasn't in. Rooms where decisions were made before anyone bothered to explain them. By morning, she'd stopped posting entirely. No stories. No check-ins. The curated version of her life went dark, and that absence drew more attention than any announcement ever could. I heard about it through proximity, not participation. A colleague mentioned, casually, that a retail partnership pitch had been postponed. Another said a brand alignment meeting ended early, no follow-up scheduled. Names weren't spoken directly, but context filled the gaps. At lunch, someone forwarded a group message by mistake. It wasn't meant for me. It was a thread of speculation, thinly veiled as concern. Someone asked if she was still stable. Someone else replied that leadership didn't like complications attached to upward movement. No one defended her. Status arrangements survive on collective belief. Once doubt enters the room, belief fractures fast. That afternoon, she reached out again, but this time not to me. She called my sister, then a mutual friend, then someone she barely tolerated before. The pattern was obvious. She was looking for an anchor, someone who could still vouch for her. No one called me to ask what was happening. They didn't need to. Silence answers questions more effectively than explanations ever could. Later, a message finally came through from her that I opened. Not because it was urgent, but because it marked a shift. She didn't accuse. She didn't demand. She said people were acting strange. She said she felt exposed. She asked if I'd heard anything. I didn't respond. That evening, she attended a family gathering alone. Photos surfaced online. She stood slightly apart in every frame. The smile didn't reach her eyes. The comments underneath were polite, generic, cautious. The kind people use when they don't want to be associated too closely. Mark Reynolds was not there. That mattered more than anything else. By nightfall, the narrative had adjusted without me touching it. She wasn't framed as wrong. She was framed as uncertain. And uncertainty is poison in environments built on confidence and control. She'd built her momentum on alignment with power, on proximity to someone who could open doors quietly. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly proximity disappears when the optics shift. I remained unmentioned, unseen, unbothered. From the outside, it probably looked like she was just going through a rough patch. Stress, pressure, transition. But those watching closely could see the deeper signal. She wasn't being attacked. She was being stepped around. And that kind of social absence hurts more than confrontation ever could, because there's no one to argue with and nowhere to place the blame. By the time she realized she was alone, she was already surrounded by people. That's how it usually happens. The room stays full, but nothing reaches back. I heard about her attempts to stabilize through fragments. A mutual contact mentioned she'd started showing up early to meetings she once breezed into late. Someone else said she was overprepared now, slides triple-checked, talking longer than necessary. Overcorrection is a tell. It signals fear without saying it out loud. She tried to reconnect with routines that had once grounded her. Morning workouts she used to skip. Group lunches she used to dominate. None of it landed the way it used to. The responses stayed polite, measured, non-committal. People hadn't turned against her. They'd simply adjusted. From where I was, I could see the perimeter closing without anyone stepping forward to claim responsibility. That's the cleanest kind of collapse. No villain, no confrontation, just space widening where support used to be. She sent one message late that evening. Not angry, not apologetic, observational. She said she felt like she was talking and no one was answering anymore. She said something had changed and she couldn't identify when. I didn't reply. At work, I passed her name once in a system log tied to a retail integration. Not flagged, just deferred. Pending review. Those 2 words stall more careers than any scandal ever could. I didn't follow up. The next day, she reached out again. This time she didn't ask about me. She asked if I was still in the city. The implication hung there, unspoken. She needed proximity. Something familiar enough to remind her who she was before everything became transactional. I stayed unreachable. Later, I heard she tried to lean on Mark Reynolds again. Not publicly, quietly. The kind of contact that's meant to reassure without commitment. He didn't respond the way he used to. No visible alignment. No public backing. Power doesn't abandon loudly. It fades out. That night, she sat alone in a place she once used to impress people. A restaurant where she knew the staff by name. A corner table meant for meetings that blurred into favors. She posted nothing from there. No one checked in. The absence had finally reached a point where it could no longer be reframed as coincidence. She wasn't losing because someone pushed her. She was losing because the structure she'd relied on no longer recognized her as essential. And the part she still hadn't connected was that the first thing to disappear hadn't been status, or access, or influence. It had been me. Not in anger. Not in protest. Just quietly removed. like a dependency no one realized the system had been relying on until it was gone. She found me because at that point, there was nowhere else to look. Not my apartment, not my office, not the places she used to assume I'd be when she needed me. She found me through absence, through the outline left behind when someone stops showing up everywhere at once. I noticed her before she noticed me. The way her posture tightened when she realized I was actually there. The hesitation before she stepped closer, like she was approaching something unfamiliar. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. That surprised her more than it surprised me. She said she'd been trying to understand what happened. She said everything shifted too fast. She said she never meant for things to get this far. I let her speak, not out of courtesy, but because silence changes the shape of words. Without interruption, they collapse under their own weight. She mentioned the ring, called it a mistake, said she'd expected me to react, to follow, to demand something. She said she hadn't thought I'd take it seriously. That part landed differently. She asked if I'd done something, if I'd said something to someone, if this was retaliation. I shook my head. That was the only movement I made. She tried again, softer this time. She said she felt like she was disappearing, that people were treating her differently, that doors were closing without explanation. She said she didn't know where she stood anymore. I didn't tell her, not because I wanted to punish her, but because explanations restore balance. They give the other person something to push against. I wasn't here to re-enter the dynamic she'd broken. She stepped closer, not touching, just inside the space that used to belong to us. She said she needed to know if we were done, if this was permanent. I looked at her then, really looked. She was composed, hair perfect, clothes intentional, still playing the role, still selling stability while everything underneath it was shaking. I said very little, enough to register, not enough to negotiate. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I'd just stopped participating. She asked what that meant. I didn't answer, because meaning is something people assign when they're still in control. She wasn't, and she knew it. She stood there for a moment longer, waiting for something else. A cue, a shift, a softening. It didn't come. When she finally stepped back, the realization followed her movement. Not anger, not despair, understanding, not of what she'd lost, but of the fact that whatever had been holding her in place before was no longer there to catch her. And for the first time since she'd thrown the ring, she left without testing whether I'd follow. After that, things unraveled faster than she could reframe them. Not publicly, not in a way that invited sympathy. It happened in the gaps between meetings, in the quiet delays that never came with explanations. A review that didn't get scheduled, a follow-up that never arrived, a role that stayed under consideration long enough to stop feeling real. I heard about it indirectly. A former contact mentioned that her name had been removed from a project distribution list. Someone else said leadership wanted a cleaner signal before committing to any advancement. The language stayed neutral. That was the point. Neutrality gives no one to fight. Mark Reynolds faded from her orbit completely. No shared appearances. No subtle endorsements. No casual mentions. When his name came up, it was attached to restructuring and efficiency, not mentorship or vision. She wasn't cut loose. She was quietly deprioritized. At home, what used to be our apartment began to empty itself. Deliveries stopped. Utilities shifted to autopay under her name alone. The silence there stretched differently now. It wasn't charged. It was inert. She reached out once more, not to ask for answers, but to say she didn't recognize her life anymore. She said everything she'd built felt temporary all of a sudden. She said she kept replaying moments she'd dismissed before. Small things. My routines. My consistency. The way things used to just work without her thinking about them. I didn't respond. That kind of realization doesn't need confirmation. It needs time to settle, and time doesn't argue back. By evening, the story around her had solidified. Not dramatic enough to trend. Not scandalous enough to warn others. Just unstable enough to be avoided. Invitations slowed. Introductions stopped. People stayed polite but distant, like they were waiting to see how things turned out before deciding how close to stand. I was already somewhere else, building a life that didn't require visibility to function. My days stayed full. Predictable. Quiet in the way that signals alignment rather than loss. Her collapse didn't come with a single moment. No breakdown. No scene. Just a gradual realization that the safety she'd traded for leverage had been conditional, and the one thing she'd assumed would always be there was gone. Not because I wanted her to fall, but because when she tested the boundary, she'd mistaken silence for weakness. And systems don't respond to tests with emotion. They respond by shutting down what no longer belongs. The last time I saw her, nothing dramatic happened. No raised voices. No apologies delivered too late. No attempt to rewrite the past in softer language. We crossed paths in a place that used to feel neutral, a space where people passed through without leaving anything behind. She noticed me a second after I noticed her. That delay said more than any conversation could have. She looked different. Not undone. Just unanchored. The polish was still there, but it no longer communicated confidence. It felt like maintenance. Like something she was keeping alive out of habit rather than belief. She didn't step closer this time. She didn't ask questions. She didn't test the distance. She only nodded, a small acknowledgement that carried more weight than the ring ever had. I returned it and kept moving. Later, I heard she'd taken a lateral role at a smaller company. Less visibility, less promise, more stability than prestige. Mark Reynolds' name never came up again in connection with hers. Whatever that arrangement had been, it had dissolved without witnesses. There was no moment where she publicly fell apart. No scene that validated anyone's assumptions. Just a quiet recalibration of expectations, hers included. As for me, life settled into something simpler. Cleaner. My days were structured. My nights were quiet. I didn't feel lighter because nothing had been lifted. I felt steady because nothing was pulling anymore. People assume disappearance is an emotional act. That it comes from pain or resentment or fear. They imagine someone turning away in anger, cutting ties to protect themselves. That's not what this was. I didn't leave to teach her a lesson. I didn't disappear to be missed. I didn't clear my life out of spite. I responded to the message exactly as it was delivered. When she threw the ring and walked out, she wasn't asking for space. She was testing whether I'd stay predictable under pressure, whether I'd negotiate my place in her life while she reached for something higher. I didn't argue with the test. I ended the game. Not with confrontation, not with exposure, not with revenge, just with a complete withdrawal from anything that required me to accept less than mutual respect. I didn't disappear. I stopped showing up where I wasn't valued. And once you do that, there's no need for closure. The silence takes care of it for you. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.